Well, if you think you need hundreds of thousands of dollars to break into commercial real estate, it's time to ditch that view. In fact, you can buy a commercial property with just $60,000 in deposit. That's according to Scott O'Neill, Director of Rethink Investment, and he joins us now. Scott, thank you very much for being with us.
Hey, Scott.
Morning, guys.
A bit hard to believe here. $60,000. How does that work?
A lot of people think you need hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy commercial property, but it's not true. There's a 30% deposit, yes, but commercial properties, decent quality ones, can start around $200,000. So I've got a few examples I'll go through, but you know, $60,000 is a deposit plus cost. You know, there might be another 10, 15 grand there. You're in the market in commercial, and the cash flow you get from those are going to be far better than anything you'll get in residential. And right now, with the markets as slow as they are with residential, it's probably a good time for people to consider it.
Yeah, we're hearing more of this push, the little swing for investors to go from residential to commercial. But, you know, at this sort of price point, where are these properties? Are they out the back of Coonabarra?
No, most of them are capital cities, believe it or not.
Okay.
So you can buy very cheap Melbourne offices around that price. We've been buying a lot of warehouses for my clients in Brisbane. It can be as close as 30 or 25 minutes out from the city.
Wow.
They're just smaller properties, so a lot of the value is trapped in the rent on a commercial property. So when the lettable area is a little bit smaller, for example, less than 100 square metres for a warehouse, the rent's going to be in line with that. So the price is lower. So it doesn't mean they're bad quality. It actually just means it's a smaller property. And in some cases, it's a lot easier to find tenants for those smaller properties because the rent's cheaper.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask about, you know, if we're looking on the lower end of the price spectrum, are we talking about lesser quality? Sounds like that's not the case. What about potential demand, Scott?
So exact same rules as residential. You don't buy a commercial property unless you see the demand for that type of property increasing. So I like warehouses, I've said it on this show before, because there's the e-commerce boom at the moment. People store. It's a cheap place to put, you know, supplies for retail business even. So as long as you go buy a place where there's an increasing population, they're not building too many of these industrial units, the demand for these will increase over the years, and that should push rents up. As the rents go, there goes your price. Capital growth will come. So Brisbane's example again.
You like the adaptability of that warehouse type dwelling. Is that a good choice for people who are beginning as a commercial investor? Where do you think that they should start?
Yeah, big time. Couple of reasons. They're extremely low maintenance, like they're just 3 walls and a roof and a garage door. Not much really can go wrong over a 20-year period.
The wall was.
So they're just a really versatile. I've seen people put freezers in them, big fridges. I'll run through an example later. A karate, you know, school. Yeah, those ones. So you can. It's a space like classic cars. You know, I've seen people store them in these places. They rent them for decades in many cases. It's a great property for a starter because in 20 years' time, people still need to store things.
Yes.
There might be question marks about where retail's going and other kind of like office space, for instance, but storage, that's not going anywhere.
So, Scott, it sounds like you need to have a bit of imagination and think creatively here. When you're talking about the potential of that investment, are there any simple ways to understand how to look at it?
Look, again, it's harder than residential, but it is supply-demand. So when I go look at a property, even if it's like a cafe, you want to go understand if there's many competitors around that, you know, vicinity. Is there potential for more to come online? Is that business secure? Like, that's going to be your biggest question. Is there going to be more of this created, which will hurt the business currently in place? But if the business is successful and everything else is kind of basically stagnant around the area where there's no big changes in increases or declines, you're going to see that perform pretty well.
Now, you mentioned a cafe, and it seems that even if times are getting tough, people are always going to eat. They're probably going to all still have a drink. Let's look at one that you've recently done. It's one that you bought for $195,000, but if I'm correct, you get a whopping $22,000 a year return. Is that correct?
That's correct. So this property, I love this one because it's right on a corner. It's in Hervey Bay, and it's in an industrial complex. There's no other competitors nearby. There's a 90 car space complex right behind it, so all the businesses feed into this business. And it's got a 4-year lease on it. It's got an expensive fit out that the tenant owns, so they're not just going to pack up shop.
It looks very sharp.
You can see they've got pride in the business. So, you know, this is one of the differences with residential. Like, you're dealing with a tenant it's got a business reputation, which makes them less likely to trash your property or default on the rent. They need to keep this going for their livelihood. And the customers are very loyal for cafes. They'll keep going back.
I'm one of those.
It's a consistent
I've got a
business.
few that I sleep with, but I definitely have one. Just going through the prices there, you've got the purchase price on the top, then the deposit. Well, explain what's involved in that other $12,875, the other costs.
So your other costs will be your stamp duty. You allow for about $1,500 for a valuation, $550 for a building and pest or a strata report. I've even put $2,000 in there for a contingency as well, just for, if there's delays or loans or you get a depreciation report. They're all your extra costs. So $58,500 is your deposit plus the other costs. You're looking at a total deposit you'd need of 71 grand for that. So 71,000 is not out of reach for most people. Most people buying a residential property will have more than that.
Yes.
So the cash flow from this will be $13,100, and that's at a 70% loan at a 5% interest rate. So to put that into perspective, imagine owning 10 of these. You're up for $1.95 million. That's 131,000 passive income from your property. Imagine go and buy 2 units in Sydney, $1 million each. They rent for $700 per week, maybe $4 grand strata. You'd be lucky to clear 10 to 15 grand with the same equation.
Yeah, it definitely sounds really positive, doesn't it?
Certainly some very attractive numbers there. Looking at another one, a dental clinic in Kapalaba in Queensland. What made this one a good buy?
Well, a few things. It's quite close to the CBD. The dentist had been there for 16 years. He had a succession plan in there as well. There's a younger guy going to take over this business. Dentist fit-out's very expensive. They start at about $150 and they can be $500,000. This one would be a cheaper one, of course, but that makes a tenant quite immovable. They're not going to pack up shop to move next door because the rent's 5% cheaper. These guys are stuck, hence the reason they've been there for 16 years. The dentist, I actually looked at the same kind of square metre rates for residential properties in the market, and they're about 20 to 30% more. So we got this property cheaper than a residential per square metre, plus we've got a dentist on a 5-year lease, over 7% net yield. It's an absolute no-brainer. I don't know why people would ever consider residential when you've got deals like this just nearby.
Yeah, I think that it's a really important point that you make. I just want to question, you mentioned the word succession plan for the dentist. How much research are you able to find out to get that sort of information? I mean, you're therefore discussing and working with the existing tenant of the property when you're looking to purchase the property.
So you put it under a contract under a 21-day due diligence. In that time, you call the business up. You might even get a rental manager or two to walk in there, pretend to be a client, just to get a feel of it.
Check out my teeth. Yeah,
basically, see how they are. We contacted this owner a few times just to triple check things, and we're just, because the person that was buying this, my client, was very conservative. It was the type that we couldn't afford a vacancy. So you just got to go into extra detail, and we're confident in the business. If this guy retires, he's got another guy in his mid-30s about to take over.
Scott, you mentioned the specifics of the dental practice having a lot that needs to be in that place and the cost involved in fitting it out. Does that apply to, I suppose, all medical? Are there any other kind of types of business that really fit that category? Yeah, so medical is a very good example. Like dentist is one. We bought a hearing clinic the other day. Just had an expensive fit out. Any type, like cafes.
Optical's about the same. They've got big pieces of machinery that are weighty to put
exactly, like X-ray. We've bought a few sort of blood clinic type businesses. They've got to have a certain level of quality to their field. You don't want. It's rarely you go into a medical practice and it feels like it's 100 years old. They've got to keep it up to date.
Yes.
And that makes the tenants a little bit more stable, and it applies for all things. Like that cafe we showed you just before, that was about a $40,000-$50,000 fit out. They painted the walls, they own the signs, they got all the chairs and the coffee machines and all that. So they've spent money on it, which you don't get that with residential. They move their furniture in. It can cost $500 to move out if they do it themselves. So it's a different story.
It is a different story. We've got another one to look at, a warehouse that you bought for $270,000. How did you find this deal, and what made it such a good buy?
Love this one because it's a 150 square metre warehouse. Again, it could be used for anything, but this one is it's got a karate school in there. The karate school's been there for 9 years now. Extremely success. He's the only guy in town. This is North Brisbane again, and that complex you're seeing on the screen is fully occupied. Rents are increasing because of that.
It's a perfect space for that sort of use, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's got a good reputation in town, and this actual area is actually booming in population too. So I can't see how this guy will go broke. If he did, you've only got to find a tenant for $20,000 a year anyway. So there would be another one lined up.
Well, it's one of those things that lots of kids get into for health and fitness, and older guys and girls as well. So it is pretty amazing. It's interesting to see how it fits. Do you look at the dynamic of how that particular place worked with the other existing tenants as well?
Of course. So you wouldn't want three, karate schools right in the same area. This is the only fitness type business in this complex. Most of them are like anything from mechanics. There was someone who was doing wedding supplies out of one. He had a big freezer where they would store meat in another one. So there's all different types of businesses, which that's sort of why I like it for a first-time buyer, because if they're first time, the chances are they're younger, which means they're going to hold this property for decades. No one can really predict the world in 20, 30 years' time. No. So if you buy something that's versatile, you've got more chances of success in 30 years' time.
Fantastic. Wow. So interesting, I think, yeah.
From coffee to dental to taekwondo or karate. Scott O'Neill, it's always a pleasure to have you on here. You are from Rethink Investing, and you do make us rethink how we should be investing, so really good pun. Great to have you on here, and thanks for all of your sound advice, as always.
Thanks again, guys.
Yes, thank you, Scott.